Every famous person is born somewhere. Susan B. Anthony, Millard Fillmore, Bela Bartok, and Paul Newman each have hometowns or special locations that claim them. In Binghamton, we get to claim Rod Serling. He was born in Syracuse, but his family moved to Binghamton when he was 2, and Rod graduated from Binghamton High School in 1943. Students who took classes from Helen Foley at Binghamton High School remember times when Rod Serling would come and occasionally visit her classes and talk with the students about film and television, story writing, and production. When I got to church this morning, Craig Zare, who does a lot of stuff in the kitchen, he stopped me and he talked to me, he told me about his experience as a kid of Rod Serling visiting his father and having Rod Serling sitting in his living room talking with his dad. I'm sure some of you have personal memories, perhaps, of meeting Rod Serling. He was a generous man who loved to connect back here to his roots. Binghamton loves to talk about this native son of ours, 40 years after his death. New exhibits and programs related to the Twilight Zone and Rod Serling are still opening. Just a few weeks ago, the Historical Society had an event at WSKG, and the Bundy Museum recently expanded its Twilight Zone and Rod Serling exhibit. Everyone has to have a hometown, Rod Serling said. Binghamton is mine. And the reason I'm preaching about Rod Serling has less to do with his geography and more to do with his theology. Rod and his siblings were raised in a Reformed Jewish home here in town. He was never a member of this congregation here in Binghamton, but when he was a student at Antioch College in Ohio, he met and married Carol Kramer, and Carol's Unitarian grandmother encouraged the couple to attend a Unitarian church, and in the late 1940s, Rod and Carol Serling became members of the Unitarian Church in Columbus, Ohio. When the family moved to California in 1957, they became active members of the Santa Monica Unitarian Church. This is all before merger of Unitarians and Universalists, so it's the Santa Monica Unitarian Church that he joined. The minister Ernie Pipes served that congregation for over 30 years and remembered Rod Serling as a generous man. For example, as a fundraiser for the congregation, Rod Serling would offer screenings of his films from time to time and would lead discussions about them with members of the congregation. He liked to visit the RE classrooms and talk about his work with the kids. We're going to do something like that here in this congregation later this afternoon. We won't have Rod Serling himself with us, but we'll be able to watch a few of his episodes, witness some of that genius on the screen, and talk about them together. I want to show you a clip right now of one of the episodes, just a few minutes from it. The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street. It's one of the 2 episodes that the planning team decided to use for this afternoon's discussion event. So it opens, just to set you the stage a little bit, it opens on Maple Street, a normal, ordinary street, on a normal and ordinary day. Then there's this strange sound and a flash of light that seems to travel through the sky from one end of the street to the other. And we see people look up, and they watch it go by, and they mutter, and they comment to one another about it, and they decide that it must have been a meteor. And they each shrug to one another and admit that it was certainly odd. And then the narrator says, tells us that was the last calm and reflective moment before the monsters came to Maple Street. So the clip that I'm going to show you is right after everybody in town has figured out that stuff has stopped working. And they gather together to start figuring out what's really going on.
Is your phone all right? Okay, get anybody online.
I'll cut across the backyard, see if the power is still on Floral Street.
Doesn't make sense. Why should the power go off all of a sudden and the phone line?
Maybe some kind of an electrical storm or something.
Now, that don't seem likely. The sky's just as blue as anything. Not a cloud, no lightning, no thunder, no nothing. How could it be a storm?
Can't get a thing on the radio, not even on the portable.
Why don't we go downtown and check with the police? They'll probably think we're crazy or something. A little power failure and everybody gets flustered and everything.
It isn't just a power failure, Charlie. If it were, we'd still be able to get a broadcast on the portable. I'll take a run downtown. Maybe I can get it straightened out there. Well, I guess what we need to do is run a check of the neighborhood and find out which ones of us are really human.
Nobody's standing around making bum jokes about it. I wonder if Floral Street's got the same kind of deal we have. So where's Pete Van Horn? Has he come back yet?
Does your car start, Les?
No dice. Well, I don't know what's wrong. Nothing seems to be working.
Can't even get the car started. Car started somehow. He got his car started.
How come his car just happened started like that? All by itself. He wasn't anywhere near it. It just started all by itself.
He never did come out to look at that thing that flew overhead. He wasn't even interested. He always was an oddball. Him and his whole family. Real oddball. Yeah, why didn't he come out with the rest of us to look? What do you say we go ask her?
Wait a minute! Now let's not be a mob.
Let's not be a mob. Oh, we'll watch the rest of it later. But I stopped it right at that point because you'd seen enough to know, I mean, it's just going to get worse. But you saw how it built. The episode is about how easy it is to get caught up in that mob mentality. It's about fear and panic as tools of prejudice and chaos. In the context in which the show was written, it's easy to extrapolate that this episode is not just about fear in general. It's also about McCarthyism and the Red Scare that was going on in the 1950s and 60s. And I argue that it is equally about terrorism and Islamophobia that is happening in our country today. A significant number of the messages in his episodes are about addressing the problems of prejudice, about seeing the consequences of treating people with differences as the other. So to update this episode, my first thought was of how dramatic it would be if this morning I woke up and all the power in our electronics had just stopped, just like that. And how quickly would you notice if that had happened in your house? I have a household of 5 right now. And in today's middle-class culture, that means I have 5 computers, 5 cell phones, and a couple of tablets as well to add to that 1960s list of lights and radios and stoves. And in some ways, just watching these first 3 minutes of the episode, with today's sensibilities, I might assume that the message is going to be about how we are too attached to our electronics and how we don't know our neighbors anymore. And that may well be a worthwhile episode, but I suspect it might be too prosaic a message for what Rod Serling was doing with the Twilight Zone. But then again, remember, the closing line of the episode, or when you go later and watch, you'll see the closing line of the episode, that part of what this is about is the message that humanity's worst enemy is itself. So in what ways are we destroying ourselves piece by piece today? We can talk more about that actual episode and its messages later this afternoon. Let me drift back in the conversation about what Rod Serling was doing with this show. He considered his job as a writer was to menace the public conscience. He wanted to lift up the ethical questions of the day and challenge his viewers. He was a storyteller, living by the axiom that the one who tells the stories helps shape how we see the world. In his day, Serling learned to disguise his messages after having his stories dramatically altered or outright refused due to concerns from the government censors and the advertising executives. Serling started writing in the genre of science fiction not because he loved sci-fi or because he was particularly skilled in that genre, but because his social critique would get past the censors. He claimed a Martian can say things that a Republican or a Democrat can't. What would Rod Serling be doing today? What would an updated Twilight Zone be like? I think we get lost in the delight of the spookiness and the strange element of the show at the detriment to its deeper message. Serling would not necessarily be doing anything sci-fi today because he wouldn't need to disguise his message from censors today. There are a great many documentaries available today offering political and social critique. Comedians do late-night shows that are able to offer stinging and truthful commentary mixed in with their jokes. Censorship is not today's issue. Society has different ways of closing down unpopular truth speakers. So my question is, what are the hurdles Rod Serling would be overcoming to get his message of social critique out to the public today? I think one of the overarching problems for truth tellers today is that there is not a single acceptable claim on truth, as was the case in Serling's day. No single party line that was hard to speak against. Instead, today, we have so many voices speaking that truth gets lost in the milieu. Advertising companies and political talking heads drive the population into market niches, feeding us consumable bites of information. I believe the great enemies of truth today that Serling would be working to circumvent is the well-dressed lie and the difficulty of discerning real truth amidst the glitter and grime. The Washington Post ran an article yesterday talking about a problem called pluralistic ignorance. Basically, research by social scientists showed that I, for example, will self-silence my own voice out of an incorrect assumption that other people don't agree with me. This becomes amplified by a doubt in my own competence on the subject. Social scientists call this pluralistic ignorance. The word's not important. The concept is that it's this misplaced belief that others know better and wouldn't agree with me, so I won't even bother speaking up. This then spirals because nobody knows what others think about an issue because nobody is talking about it. The examples in the article are about climate change, gender-related issues, and the civil rights movement of the 60s and 70s even. Imagine Rod Serling. I think he would be able to spin a fabulous story about a compelling lie that no one challenges, even though the majority of people privately suspect it is untrue. And lies are essentially stories that can shape how we see the world. Serling was a genius storyteller, revealing truth in his stories. His messages in the Twilight Zone often centered on peace and equality, respect for differences, and the importance of civility, which are messages we don't often hear in the news and events today. These values can be seen in the clip that we just saw from The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street. These are the values that would show up in a story today about racism or gender issues or climate change or political incivility. Serling would be telling stories today, not necessarily with aliens and oddities, although that certainly would still work today and perhaps prove a necessary element. I'm not sure. But more importantly, Rod Serling would be writing stories, I believe, about discerning truth in the confusion and profusion of lies that pass for commentary and opinions and even news these days. Rod Serling was a Unitarian Universalist, steeped in the naturalistic humanist values of truth, tolerance, and respect for our differences toward the end of building a civil society in which all people can thrive. we can still learn about today's problems through the lessons that he offered in the past. We can still discern truth and wisdom from the genius of his work, and indeed we can even unleash our own capacity to tell the truths our world needs to hear, to tell them with confidence and style, as he and others have done throughout the ages. So come, let us gather around the wisdom of such a genius for a few moments, and then let us rise and add our voices to the story as we move boldly into the beckoning future together. In a world without end, may it be so. Let us join in singing